At Tillamook, our cheesemakers don't just make cheese, they speak cheese. Our ice cream scientists, they live to brainstorm new flavors.
I dub thee malted cookie almond fudge.
Even our customer service team, there's nothing they'd rather talk about than whatever you'd like to talk about.
Tillamook, this is Jazz speaking.
That's because at Tillamook, it's not so much a job as it is a way of life. This is Tillamook. Do right by every bite. Find out more at Tillamook.com.
This is CBS Eye on the World with John Batchelor. Here's John Batchelor.
This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. I welcome Conrad Black, Lord Black, a distinguished biographer writing at the National Post about someone I'm just learning is fundamental to the success of North America here in the 21st century. Sir John Alexander Macdonald, born in Scotland, the first Prime Minister of Canada. He lived 1815 to 1891. Why this all of a sudden becomes important is that Canada's undergoing an investigation of its own history. Good. There is an organization called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Good. This speaks to the unacceptable conduct of Canadians who are no longer alive. No one alive was participating in this towards the Native American population. The U.S. has a similar shameful past. However, Sir John Macdonald is quoted in Conrad's most recent column at the National Post, and my memory finds no comparable remark by an American president at any point between the opening of the West following the Civil War and the closing of the West sometime in the 20th century. Sir John Macdonald is quoted in Parliament saying Canada had, quote, defrauded the Indian time and again under the Liberals, giving them inferior grain and oxen. Conrad, I come to you now. Sir John Macdonald said something that no American president said. Is he remembered for it, for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? Is he credited for having been a visionary about the bad conduct of some people in both Canada and the United States? Good evening to you.
Oh, good evening, John. Unfortunately, he is not. He is well remembered throughout this country as the chief founder of the country and a very, very distinguished statesman. As I've written elsewhere, even in the times of Lincoln and Bismarck and Palmerston and Disraeli and Gladstone in Britain, he was a great statesman, not perhaps as great as those men, but was known, except for Bismarck, he was known by all of them, and they all regarded him very highly. And he is generally well thought of for the obvious reason that he was the chief architect of the constitutional framework of this country. It's the only transcontinental bicultural parliamentary confederation there has ever been in the world. And next to the United Kingdom and the United States, it has the longest serving, continuous, most durable political institutions of any large country, any country over 25 million people. But unfortunately, this Truth and Reconciliation Commission has very selectively extracted facts from, I mean, they're only really looking into the history of the natives in Canada. They're not dealing with the rest of Canadian history. And they've chosen very selectively amongst incidents that occurred in the long period that Macdonald was the head of the government, and have accused him of, and I quote them, going to war against the natives. And that's what I was really objecting to and remonstrating against, because his record with the natives was, in fact, a positive one. He gave them the vote, and he said they had the same rights as white people.
Right, more quotes from the Prime Minister. This is following the Frog Lake Massacre, 1885. A Liberal MP, David Mills, demanded to know if Macdonald, then Prime Minister, would permit Aboriginal people to, quote, go from the scalping party to the polls, end quote. Macdonald's reply, in part, Aboriginal Indians, formerly lords of the soil, formerly owning the whole of this country, they have the same rights as the white man. That probably was an enormously controversial remark following those events, and Macdonald said it. Is there an education today for the young Canadians to learn about Macdonald and his quotes in support of the Aboriginal Indians?
There definitely is. This country has been much less persevering and thorough in teaching its history to generations of young Canadians than yours has. Now, I must say, my impression is that in the United States, the teaching of American history has deteriorated seriously. But in general, I have American cousins, and when we were young, I was always impressed at how well they knew their history. Better than, in general, we knew ours. But the fact is, Canada should know itself better, and it should be better prepared than it has been to rebut those particular arguments. I mean, that commission you refer to did bring out a lot of important points, and they made a lot of valuable recommendations and restated the official record in a way that in some cases was necessary. But it went too far, and it took advantage of precisely the relative ignorance of which I've just been speaking, where Canadians, frankly, aren't generally that familiar with what happened in Indian policy, unless they happen themselves to be so-called Indians, natives, and so the country took much too credulously this argument that MacDonald was a bad man. They blame him for a famine in the early 1880s, but the natives lived far beyond where the roads were, let alone the railroads, and the federal government did what it could to distribute food, but it now comes to pass that the total number of people who died as a result of that, it's a terrible thing to have famine, especially in a very rich country like this one, but 45 people died. Well, that's over a number of years. That is terribly unfortunate, but the federal government did its best to distribute food, and they can't be accused of genocide because 45 people died over 5 years in the remotest parts of the country.
You write that the grievance of the natives is not the Europeans coming to North America. It's the expansion of European culture across the breadth of the land. Is that a debate in Canada? That you should not have moved from the Atlantic coast across to the Pacific coast? Do people think that, do they regret that, Conrad?
No, I don't think so. I think what's happened is the champions of native victimhood have taken advantage of both the goodwill and the general sense of some guilt and the, frankly, quite widespread ignorance of what the European settlers, French and English, what their relations with the native people were like. And so in that vacuum, they've presented this case that implies at times that the Europeans invaded Canada, these are my words now, my example, like the Germans and Russians invaded Poland in 1939. And of course it wasn't that way. There were 200,000 natives and they weren't occupying the whole country. So the greatest objection isn't that the Europeans came to Canada. It is that as they spread across the country, they thinned out and drove away the herds of buffalo, and it became terribly difficult for the natives to feed themselves in the way they had done for time immemorial.
I mentioned, Conrad, again and again, when the statue of Ulysses Grant was pulled over in San Francisco by youth last year, that's when I focused on the fact that this had gone too far. But since then, what I've learned is it's an opportunity to speak of Grant in the 21st century and why he's important. Is that possible that we can find in this defamation of MacDonald a chance to speak of the actual events and educate everyone?
That is my hope, and that's why I wrote the piece that you have kindly referred to. I believe it is an opportunity, and look, to some degree, all countries should be conscious of their history. Right. And to some degree, all countries have a mythos about their history. That's how the mind works. You always try and emphasize the virtues and value of your own nationality.
We have 30 seconds, Conrad. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the answer is yes, absolutely. What we need is to know our history better, and by which I do not mean a glorification, a whitewash, or a beatification, but in fact, in this country as in yours, those who settled it, explored it, and developed it in general were courageous people who were absolutely essential to bringing into the world this mighty North America that has twice gone or thrice gone to the rescue of the old world in both world wars and the Cold War, and has done so much to spread, especially the United States, but Canada proportionately, the concepts of democracy and the free market everywhere in the world.
Conrad Black in Toronto, Sir John MacDonald in heaven. This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor.
Parents and guardians, get your children ready for a healthy back to school. Schedule a checkup with their doctor and dentist and make sure they're up to date with new immunization standards. A message from the Virginia Department of Health and Virginia Department of Education. Parents and guardians, get your children ready for a healthy back to school. Schedule a checkup with their doctor and dentist and make sure they're up to date with new immunization standards. A message from the Virginia Department of Health and Virginia Department of Education.